It was a stormy night when Flight 713, bound for London from New York, took off from JFK Airport. The plane was half full, with weary passengers settling into their seats, oblivious to the eerie silence that seemed to settle over the aircraft as it ascended into the dark, turbulent sky. Among them was Olivia, a travel journalist on her way to cover a conference. She had flown many times before, but something about this flight felt off. She couldn't shake the creeping unease that had settled in her chest the moment she boarded. As the plane soared above the clouds, the lights flickered briefly, causing a few murmurs among the passengers. The captain's voice came over the intercom, reassuring everyone that the storm was merely causing some minor turbulence. But Olivia noticed something strange. When the lights flickered, the reflection in her window didn't match the cabin. Instead of her fellow passengers, she saw shadowy figures seated in their place, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. She blinked, shaking her head, convinced it was a trick of her tired mind. But when she looked again, the figures remained. A chill ran down her spine. She turned to the man seated next to her, but before she could say anything, a voice whispered in her ear, cold and distant, "They never left." Olivia gasped, looking around, but no one else seemed to have heard it. The passengers continued their quiet conversations or slept, unaware of the growing tension in the air. Determined to shake off her fear, she closed her eyes, trying to get some rest. But the whispers returned, this time louder, more insistent. "You shouldn't be here." Unable to ignore it any longer, Olivia unbuckled her seatbelt and made her way to the back of the plane, where the flight attendants were stationed. She needed to know if anyone else was experiencing what she was. As she reached the galley, she found it empty. The door to the crew quarters was slightly ajar, and inside, she heard hushed voices. Peeking through the crack, she saw the flight attendants, their faces pale and tense, talking in low voices. "It's happening again," one of them said. "Ever since that crash, the spirits have never left." Olivia's heart raced. Crash? She had never heard of any incident involving Flight 713. Before she could process what she had overheard, the plane suddenly lurched, sending her crashing against the wall. The lights went out, plunging the cabin into darkness. Panicked, she scrambled to her feet, only to find herself face to face with one of the shadowy figures from her window reflection. Its eyes burned with a cold, malevolent light, and it reached out a hand, its fingers impossibly long and thin. "Join us," it whispered, its voice echoing in her mind. Olivia stumbled backward, but the figure followed, its form growing darker, more solid as it advanced. She bolted down the aisle, but the other passengers remained oblivious, their faces unnaturally still, their eyes vacant. She realized with horror that they were no longer alive. They were trapped, just like the spirits haunting the plane. The plane jolted violently again, and suddenly Olivia was thrown into a vision. She saw the same plane, Flight 713, from years ago. It was plummeting from the sky, engulfed in flames. Screams filled the cabin as it crashed into the ocean, leaving no survivors. The spirits of the passengers had been doomed to repeat their final moments for eternity. And now, Olivia had boarded their cursed flight. Snapping back to the present, Olivia knew she had to escape before it was too late. She rushed to the cockpit, praying that the pilots were still alive, still human. But when she opened the door, she was met with empty seats. The controls moved on their own, and the windows were filled with swirling black mist. A voice, deeper and more sinister than before, filled the cabin. "You will never land." The plane began to descend, the storm outside growing fiercer, lightning illuminating the shadowy figures closing in on her. Just as Olivia felt the cold grip of the spirits on her, she woke up in her seat with a violent jolt. The plane was smooth, the passengers chatting normally, and the flight attendants going about their duties. The storm outside was still raging, but everything seemed normal. Confused and disoriented, she checked her watch. Only minutes had passed since she left her seat. Had it all been a nightmare? As the plane began its descent into London, Olivia sighed with relief, but when she looked out the window, her blood ran cold. Below, through the clouds, she saw a familiar sight. An airplane wreckage submerged in the ocean, twisted metal and debris scattered across the water's surface. The flight attendant's voice crackled over the intercom. "Thank you for flying with us. We hope to see you again." On flight 713, Olivia turned to her fellow passengers, and once again, their eyes glowed faintly in the dim cabin light.